Thanks, Will. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, to everyone, and thanks for joining us for this webinar. I'd like to kick things off with a picture here from a trip to Ecuador that I took. This is in the Amazon, and I should mention that one of my other hobbies, I seem to have lots of hobbies, but I do work at times. One of my other hobbies is bird watching. And so I was able to go on this amazing trip in the Amazon with these two fellows who are guides, who had incredible visual acuity in being able to pick out the birds that they saw up in the Amazon tree canopy here. We were about 20 meters above the ground and looking out at around 7 in the morning, I think it was. Anyway, it was a fantastic trip. What this has to do with my talk, well, I'll come back to it in a little bit later, but personal circumstances made bird watching very difficult for me, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more, but I just wanted you to have a look at this. So in this talk, I will describe what QA is, then I'll go into some other aspects of the things that we test when we look at software. So usability and accessibility, security, which is a big thing these days, and performance of a software application or website. I'd like to start off with a quote here from Thorstein Bonde Veblen, who was a Norwegian-American economist and sociologist who flourished around the turn of the 20th century. And he said, "The bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten." And though this was written at least 100 years ago, it still rings true today, because if you don't spend some effort on working the quality of your product, then you're going to regret it later in unpleasant and unforeseen ways. And that's been borne out again and again. But it kind of goes into the adage of you have to spend money to make money. And this is kind of one of those places. So QA is a place where you spend a bit of money, but you'll make money on it afterwards. So what is QA? So basically it stands for quality assurance, and it really means testing. But testing is such a broad term, and there's so many things involved in testing. And on our QA team at OXD, we test the product definition, the design of a product, normally websites, how it's implemented, which means the code that's written by the developers to make it work, how it's delivered to customers, and supporting it after it's been released into production. So product quality, that's the primary goal of what we look at on the QA team, but it's part of a whole team's goal. And what we do is we find bugs, errors, and glitches in software before it's released. And we have a unique perspective that isn't the same as developers and designers. And we can find things based on years of accumulated experience. We also test the requirements and assumptions that go into designing and creating the product. So that's something that we look at before we actually start testing things that have been already written into code. And when you, pardon me, I'm suffering from the allergies of pollen this morning. So when you build a better quality product, it's really good for your brand reputation. And users, like, Will mentioned it. We were talking about software products that we can't live without or just love to use. And undeniably, those products have great quality. Like, they don't have a lot of bugs in them. They're a delight to use. And you're going to keep coming back to them. And that's the thing that companies are after. So it's great for your brand reputation. Now, in the old days, QA was kind of in its own silo, but the thinking around quality is now that it's a whole team approach. So everyone from the product designers, project managers, product managers, QA testers, developers, everyone has an eye to quality, and we work together to make sure that we create a quality product. And so with everyone working together like that, the communication within the team is really important. So here's a diagram of what a typical workflow looks like, bringing your product from the design stage into release. So it starts off with research and user experience design. And at that point, this is the product definition stage, where the specifications of the product are defined. And when this is done really well, then that means that there's a single source of truth that everyone on the team can refer to, which is the requirements of how a product is supposed to work. And those requirements are testable. And that's what we on the QA team look at that point. So how are we going to test this before it's even started to be built? Then the development stage comes in, and QA staging, where you put it to a pre-release stage. And I'll go more into these parts later, but let's focus in on development and QA at this point. So when we're working with the development team, we want to make this a very efficient process. And so what we do is they'll produce a feature for us and give it to us to test. And if we find issues, we bring it back to them. And we want this to be a very efficient process so they can immediately pinpoint what the problem is, find it in their code, and make a fix. And the essence of sort of one of the documentation that really helps them is a really good bug report. And so there's an example here on the side. I don't want you to get too far into the technical part of this, but a good bug report contains the following. So it cites the requirements that we were testing, has steps to reproduce the problem. There's an expected result. So this is what we expect to see after we do those tests. Here's the issue that was found, and some supporting material. So that could be a screenshot, it could be a screen recording, it could be log files, any artifacts that we can collect and add to the report to have a very efficient way of pinpointing the bug and getting it fixed. And to give you some idea of what the timeline for something like this is, on a well-oiled team, we can turn around a bug fix in a matter of an hour or two. So once the product has been built and tested by QA, then for many projects, what we'll do is we'll put it to another stage called user acceptance testing. And this is in a pre-production environment. So that means that it's going to be the same sort of infrastructure set up for the product as what you would have in full release. And at that point, you get the experts. So this is where you'll have the users who have specialized knowledge in their field, in their business workflow, to actually test the product for you. And so what that looks like is they will write scenarios that are based on their workflow. So what we do on the QA team is we coach them in how to write these different tests for them to run through. And it's basically meant for subject matter experts, for the business experts themselves. The example I have here is from a judicial application where court clerks are doing their workflow. Now, this might not make much sense because it's pretty high level, and it's for the clerks for them to follow. But they've actually written these scenarios, and they will then test them and give them a pass or fail, and create a bug report, which we also coach them in to help us find the issues and give them any sort of support they need while they're doing this. Now, we haven't released their product yet. There's still some more things to think about. And usability and accessibility is a huge part of it. And I say that empathy is a strong part of software testing, and I'll go into that in a sec. We have usability experts who design our software, and we on the QA team try to have the user's experience in mind as we test. And so we ask questions like, am I finding this product difficult to use? Is there something strange about it that doesn't look right? So we keep that in mind, and that really helps us find problems in usability. Now I'll go back to these two gentlemen in the Ecuadorian Amazon. So what happened to me was that my eyesight started to fail, and it turned out that after some frustration with trying to read the computer screen, I went to an eye specialist and learned that I had cataracts. And so everything was pretty blurry. And also my color perception was affected by this as well. It was like there was a film in front of my eyes. And it turned out that bird watching was no longer a possibility for me because I couldn't pick out the birds moving in the trees like I used to. And I also had to stop singing in the choir that I was in because I couldn't read the sheet music that was in front of me. Happily, That problem has now been fixed. I had a couple of eye surgeries and my eyes are now 20/20. I use reading glasses to read the computer screen, but aside from that, my vision is perfect. But during that time, I had to use accessibility settings on my computer to be able to do my work. And so I got a real taste of what it was like to have eyesight problems and how using software is affected by that sort of condition. So along with visual abilities, when we think of accessibility, we also think of folks who have impairments in hearing, motor, speech, neural, or cognitive ability. So all these things are taken into account when we do accessibility testing. And that testing has many aspects. So for example, video captioning. Some of you might be using closed captioning for this webinar, for example. And so you'll be seeing captions below your screen, like below the display like this. Keyboard navigation. So with motor impairments, it's great to be able to just tab your way through a website. I like to use keyboard navigation anyway because I find it quicker and easier than using a mouse. So that's another aspect of accessibility. Visually impaired people use screen readers. So there's built-in software that will read a website to you. Voice recognition, another one. Screen magnification, this one I'm personally well acquainted with because I needed to use this to be able to do my work. Alt text for images. So in this example, what you'll see is there's an image, but someone who is visually impaired can't see the image, but there's a description that says what the image shows. So that's important and a requirement. Color contrast. So have a look at this example. If you're colorblind, you can't see where the error on this form is. There's a red highlighter on the phone number, but you can't see what the issue is if you're colorblind. And so this is an example of where you have to think about accessibility to highlight the error that might be on this form. And also, recently it's become more important for those with cognitive impairments to have simplified information. So you want your reading level of your website to be at a certain level. So it might be grade 8 reading level, for example. And that's pretty common. And we have tools that we use. This one is called Hemingway, where it highlights text that's more complex than should be. So you can rework your text to bring it to the correct reading level. Here's an example of one of my favorite tools to test a website. This is called Wave, which is the Web Accessibility Evaluation tool. And it's just a plugin on my browser. I turn it on and it shows errors in a website. So this is the Air Canada website from some days ago. And it immediately pinpointed 4 errors and showed what they are. And there's reference material to help you find out why these don't comply to accessibility requirements and how to fix them. And this compliance is important. So anything, for example, that the government builds has to adhere to a given standard. It's called WCAG. And that standard has to be adhered to in order for any website produced by the government to be released. So in this, this is where QA is involved. So we're looking at the design. We're thinking about who we're building this for, not just a fully able audience, but those with challenges as well. And so we're thinking we want everyone to be included when we build our website. And we add tests that can tell us quickly if there's any sort of problems, as you saw in the Wave example before. And we can do testing for that. So we can do testing by hand, which is just exploring the website on our as we normally would, or we can write automated tests. And I'll go into what that means a little bit later. But automated tests are important for this sort of accessibility testing as well. Now, onto security. You'll have heard a lot about security in the past years, and I've got a few examples. These are not the most recent ones, but they are the most high-impact examples, some of the most high-impact examples that I could find. So 10 years ago, Yahoo was affected by an attack that was a hacker backed by Russian agents that managed to get access to the database and the account management tool so that they could manipulate items in the database and pull information out. and 3 billion accounts on Yahoo were actually affected. So absolute nightmare scenario. Aadhaar in India is an identity and biometric information organization, and 1.1 billion accounts were affected by a breach in their security. And it was just an unsecured programming interface that a third-party company, a state-owned utility, had exposed. And that was the route that the hackers could take in and get bank account information and other things. Facebook, of course, they have some apps that you can add to your Facebook account. And a couple of those had security holes in them, and that exposed data for over 500 million users as well. So when these security problems happen, they can be very high impact and can have a terrible impact on your company's reputation. So we test for security as well, and this is a screenshot of one of the tools that I like to use for this. It's called Burp Suite. And it has a scanner and all sorts of other bells and whistles built into it that help us find security issues. So our team has had some training to do security testing, and we can be sort of like a first wall of defense and quickly feedback any security problems that we find to our software developers, who can then fix things as well. And modern software development has security guardrails built into it. But even then, it still requires this other level of testing. Performance is really important. So look at this group of future Olympians. Think about what happens when it's fall, it's time for registration for programs for your kids, and you want to register them in swim lessons. These swim lessons are super powerful, super popular, and everyone wants to get there. So when the website opens at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning, there's a stampede, and this happens. So what this indicates is that the website is not handling the traffic that you've put on it by 1,000 people showing up right away at 9 o'clock. And so this is what we call a spike in terms of performance, where you have a whole bunch of users hitting a site at the same time. And what we do on the QA side is we have tools that we use to simulate that sort of traffic on a website to show us if it's going to be able to handle that kind of traffic from users. And we can simulate the number of users, how quickly they come onto the website, how long they stay on the website, look at what sort of response times they're getting. And again, this is something that we can quickly feed back to developments. So before we release our product, we will know that it can handle this kind of traffic. Another thing is where your website can't go down. So it has to be always available as it's put. So here's an example of something that should never go down. This is Emergency Map BC, and it shows locations of things like floods and fires. And if there's a tsunami alert, for example, up the coast, then it would appear here. And this is something that can't go down. So it needs to be stable. And what we do in our testing is to make sure that the website is stable to all those sort of hits from many people hitting it at once. Okay, so we've built all these things into our product, our website. High quality, it's accessible, it's secure, it performs well. Then what happens? So after release, now here's a rocket ship that we've got for releasing our product into the wild, and everyone's using it now. So for some of our clients at OXD, we have ongoing engagements with them where we will add features and maintain the website for a given period of time. And what we're looking for then, as a QA team, we're switching gears. So we're now looking at what's called regression testing. And what that is when you add a new feature or fix a bug on a website or something like that, what we want to make sure is that it doesn't break something elsewhere on the website. And this can be a little bit unpredictable. And this is called regression testing. So we sort of focus in on where the change is in terms of the code, and we test around it. And we also look at all the other features that we expect to be up and running and make sure that they're still working. So Examples of regressions. So like, here's a couple of favorites. One that I encountered years ago, I call the O'Brien bug, just to remember it. And I won't give you the technical details of why this happened, but all of a sudden users with apostrophes in their last names couldn't access their accounts anymore. And it turned out the apostrophe was causing a problem. So anyone with the name O'Brien, for example, could not log into their account. And another one was where a change to handle time zones in a better way ended up having the knock-on effect of wiping out email notifications for the users. So again, that's a serious problem. And these things were found before we released them, released the fixes or feature enhancements, so that these never made it out into public release. Now, I talked about test automation earlier, and this is a big topic. I could go on for hours and hours about it, but I'll give you a quick idea of what it's for. It's basically what we do is we write code that tests our software. So we write code that drives the software, the website, and we have tests written within it, so that we, if you click X, then we should see Y, and we make sure that those things are still happening. So it gives fast feedback, and it's kind of like a safety net that we have for any release that we put out with new features or bug fixes. Another concept that's become quite popular recently is shift left and shift right. So this is how we think of testing before release and after release. So I did a fair bit of discussion about what shift left is. So this is meaning the pre-release time before we put our software out into public use, where you're testing the requirements, you're testing the new code, you're testing every build of the code. So when a build is where the software developer checks in their code change that they've made, it gets incorporated into the broader code base, and then a new version of it is built and released. We also test shifting right. So this could be testing in production. So once a piece of software is out into the public release, then it is being monitored. So what happens, for example, the Guardian newspaper does this, where they'll put out a new edition. A user will encounter an error either knowingly or unknowingly, but their monitoring system in the back rooms detects this, and people get notified, and they make a fix quickly and release the new fix fast, so that very few people see any sort of problem that they have. So that's kind of it's reactive, but it's very effective. And I'd like to conclude with a quote. So discovering the unexpected is more important than confirming the known. This is George E.P. Box, who is a statistician who lived a long life, and I presume a very happy one as well, because he kind of hit on something that makes me happy about what I do. It's a quest for knowledge, and it's always an adventure, and there's all sorts of things to learn, and that constant learning is really what makes me come to work every day and enjoy the job. So I'd like to give you a quick summary of what I tried to touch on in this talk, where the QA team adds value to a project. By looking at quality, you build a great product that you love to use, and that drives user retention. Security is so important for your brand's reputation. Accessibility means nobody excluded, everyone can use your product. And efficiency, so that quick back and forth feedback cycle between us and developers creates a more efficient process of creating software and lowers the cost of doing so. Now, I've included, so as your package, for people who have attended this webinar, you'll get some resources. I've included a few on accessibility here. Security, that Burp Suite tool that I showed you, that website has a lot of information on security that's really useful as well. Performance, JMeter is one of the tools that we like to use, and you can learn more about performance on that website. And some more information on test automation, and if you want to learn about it, there's Test Automation University at the bottom there. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and there will be an email link for me as well, so feel free to contact me if you have any questions as well.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing all that, Jim. That was great. I think for me, it's really fascinating to see how QA is like the convergence of design, development, accessibility, and the user, right? Like it's really a critical role. And like, you know, to develop high quality, robust, reliable, enjoyable software, you know, it's something that we really can't overlook. And I think that's one of the great reasons why we're able to produce such high quality software. So thanks for sharing that. We will get to the Q&A, the Q&A. So please send us your questions through the Q&A feature in Zoom. We've got a couple of questions we can get to. So, and if you can't find the Q&A feature, just say it so in the chat, and maybe we can kind of walk you through it. But it should be at the bottom, one of the buttons on your screen there. So here's a big question that I'm, you know, not surprised to see. How will AI impact QA?
Right. So that's you can't go anywhere without hearing about artificial intelligence these days.
Yep.
It's on the cover of 3 magazines that I've received in the last month, for example, and everyone's wondering how it's going to help them or hinder them or displace them in their jobs. I know developers have been thinking about this, and that you can get AI to write code, for example. On the QA side, it's a really interesting question, and my team and I are thinking about this and chat about it fairly frequently. One thing that I can see it really helping with, for example, is creating test data for us. So you can, you know, think about all those people that are registering for your imaginary swim program. We could use AI to create a whole list of potential users, their addresses, and any other test data that we need to put into an application. And we can, I think with AI, we can use it to craft more intelligent test data than what we would normally be able to come up with randomly. So it could be more targeted, for example. I could see that as a big aid in our work, because test data creation can take a lot of time and a lot of effort. It can also give you perhaps some test strategies as well. I've tried this out using ChatGPT, for example, where I pointed it at a website and said, okay, how do I test this? And it gave me some ideas. I don't know if it was a full set of ideas, and I think I could see some things that I would think of that it wouldn't. So it's still, I'm not going to say nascent, because it's coming along really fast. But I could see it might give you a nudge in the right direction, but it really does require still some thought for a QA professional to use. Anyway, there's a bunch of other things I'm probably not thinking about right now, but there's that's the 2 biggies that I've got in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think like with most things, and most areas we've been seeing, it's not going to replace experience and expertise, right? But it'll get you, you know, that initial first, you know, 10-20%, it'll get you there faster. And then when you have something that you can react to and be like, no, that's not right, but at least you're actually started now, right? So it's really, it's not like someone's going to come along and use AI to just replace your job entirely, because you still need that experience, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Another question here. So someone's asking if you can speak a little bit about the QA team composition and skill distribution for a smaller organization, 30 to 50 persons, and a larger organization, 250 plus. So is there a difference in that composition? So what is the composition generally? And would it be different for a smaller versus a larger organization?
Right. Good question. So I'd say we slot into the 30 to 50 person organization, and our QA team is a team of 4. Our skill distribution, we try to be generalists as much as possible. We have a new member on our team who's a super automation specialist. It's great to have him, but he's also well versed in just general testing as well. And it's interesting because there's no specific training for QA that you come across in universities as a whole. So it's all pretty much self-taught and learned as we go. For a larger organization, and I've worked in a few, I've worked for organizations with hundreds of thousands of people in it. The QA organization is much more dispersed in that you'll have teams that work in different areas of the organization, and they're a little more specialized, and then you'll have an overall direction structure above that. But it, again, agile teams, for example, tend to be kind of ideally around 7 people, let's say, in terms of total team. So that and we're looking for a distribution of maybe 3 developers to 1 tester would be ideal. In the old days, I worked in one where the ratio was 10 developers to me. And so that was a busy time. But I think now we try to have a more even distribution in terms of developers to testers. So 3 to 1 is kind of an ideal. Hopefully that answered your question.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Another one here. I'm interested to know more about how you reach users to write scenarios to test workflows. I'm a solo user experience researcher in a small startup. Do you have your own database of users to reach out to, or do you use any particular user recruitment platforms or user testing platforms?
That is a great question that I'm probably not terribly well qualified to answer. This would be our user experience team, but we could probably hook you up with someone to discuss that. I know that for the judicial project that I'm working on, for example, we have what's called a product owner in an agile team who is a member of the court's judicial system. And she recruited people that she works with to do the testing. And so that's often what happens in UAT, user acceptance testing, where you'll speak to people in the company that you're engaged with and look for volunteers. And those people need to be prepared to spend a fair amount of time testing the product. So they really need to slot time off to do it. And I know that I'm pretty sure that we use some sort of recruitment platform sometimes for testing more general software. And if I can find an answer for that and get back to you if we get your contact information.
Yeah, definitely. Testing recruitment or just user testing recruitment is definitely a big concern, and it's a lot of work, and it's more work than people initially realize. Ideally, the closer you can get to testing with actual users, right? If you're in a product company, if you can reach out to users you already have and test with them, that's the ideal scenario, obviously. But yeah, we, like as Jim said, we've worked with recruiting companies that help us with that as well. But it's definitely a big job for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Another question here. What's your opinion or suggested best practice of using maze.co or similar applications for user testing? So I've not heard of maze.co. Have you heard of that one, Jim?
I haven't. I'm sorry to say. I'm going to jot this down along with Toggle to look into. But what we tend to do is we find kind of the happy place for the users. What's the most pain-free way of recording their test scenarios and giving feedback. So Confluence is an application that we use pretty often, and it also depends on what the user wants to use or what they're allowed to use in their organization too. So I find that Confluence is pretty good. It's got its issues as well. And in terms of best practices, what we do is we work with the user to figure out the most seamless, the easiest way for them to be able to do their testing and record their scenarios and record issues and feed them back to us. So it's very much, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. I think it's a process of deciding what works best for everyone and agreeing on it before we get started.
Yeah, just I did a quick look at the site here, and it looks like it's an integrated testing system, so that I guess as the user is using the platform or the product, they encounter test questions and scenarios, and they can report bugs and that kind of thing. I guess from the product side too, I would say that sounds great, but it's another layer of integration that you need to consider. and potentially another layer of QA, right? You've got to QA the QA software. So maybe, yeah, so that's, yeah. Okay, we've probably got time for one last question here. So this one's a bit more managery, I guess. How could I convince my boss that we need a QA role?
Well, hopefully some of that answer was incorporated into my presentation today, but I think there's one thing that I like to point out to folks, because you'll have on your team design people, development people, and yes, they can test the stuff that they design and build, and that's fine. They might be very good at testing as well. But what testers do, QA people, is we're a little pessimistic by nature. We know there's probably going to be a problem somewhere, so we're going to look for it and find it. What developers and designers normally do is make sure that what's called the happy path is working. So the software is working as we intend it. That's fine. But what we do is, with years of experience and accumulated knowledge, we look at something and think, okay, I'm going to try to make this thing fail and find ways of doing it and be creative about it. And I'm going to give the happy path. I'm going to make sure it works, but I'm also going to look at the unhappy paths where we'll feed in funny data to a form to fill in, for example, and see what happens to it. And again, it's this sort of intuition, accumulation of experience that we have, where we can find problems that I think most developers and designers can't find. So I think in that, finding the problem quickly before release again is the great investment, because you don't want to try to fix things once it's out into the public.
Yeah, I think the happy path note is definitely something that is, I think for me too, that's like one of the biggest values of QA. And, you know, as a designer, and I've dabbled in programming badly, but I know how it's supposed to work, and that's how I'll test it. And I'm not necessarily trying to break it. I'm not necessarily trying to find find clever ways to circumvent the way it's supposed to be used, right? I just use it the way I know, right? So yeah, having that extra kind of like more impartial person go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and like some of the examples you showed, Jim, I'm just like, wow, that's really detailed, really getting into the like nitty-gritty of how something works. And users will find those little cases, and they always do. So we need people to help us you know, do that first. So yeah, so I promised we'd be done before within 45 minutes, so we're at the 44-minute mark. And so we're gonna wrap that here. We'll try to get back to any questions that you have. I saw a couple here with people that want to reach out to you too, Jim, and just get connected with a couple questions. But other than that, I think that that wraps it up. Thanks, Jim, for sharing your experience and your knowledge. Thanks to all our guests for attending. Those lists of resources will be available to you. The recording of this will be also available to you, so check your email over the next day or so. That should be coming your way. Let us know if there's any other topics you'd like to hear more about from OXD by emailing us at marketing@oxd.com. And please consider joining us for our next webinar. Just stay tuned for social and our newsletter for registration details. Have a great day, and thanks again. Bye all.
Thanks, everyone.